podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
Chip, this is a new beginning for us here at the Silver Bullets podcast. We are, we had been at the Ozone for the last couple of years, and now we are embarking on a new adventure at the Buckeye Scoop. What do you think of that?
I'm very excited. Very grateful to the Buckeye Scoop for allowing us to continue with such a fine cast of characters that have been assembled. I'm obviously grateful to the Ozone. We have a lot of terrific memories there, but with Buckeye Scoop, I think, like I said, I'm truly excited to be a part of such an all-star studded cast of Ohio State characters and individuals.
Now, you and I have never been huge recruiting guys as far as diving in and really getting to know the lie of the land in terms of recruiting, but I think that we're going to learn a little bit by osmosis just from the tremendous recruiting professionals that we have at Buckeye Scoop. And in addition to learning by osmosis, I think we also, there's a little pressure off of us. We don't have to do the heavy lifting of any kind with recruiting because there are so many really talented individuals to do that for us.
Yeah, I think you articulated it very well. The pressure is off. If anything, I would say to any of our listeners, if you have not yet become a subscriber to the Buckeye Scoop, do yourself a favor. It is money well spent. It is well worth it. You will learn an awful lot about the talent that is coming up through the ranks that Ohio State is currently recruiting, as well as a number of the players that Ohio State has signed that we have not yet seen. With so many people that are so knowledgeable about how Ohio State is faring on the recruiting front, certainly recommend it.
And if you are not in a position to pay for a membership, obviously there's a lot of great free content, including all of our very many podcasts. Are all going to come your way free, so there's something for everyone, Chip.
Yes, that's well said. Absolutely, something for everyone at the Buckeye Scoop.
So, Chip, you and I haven't spoken for a while now. It's been, I guess, a couple of months. Other than that meaning, and I'm gesturing broadly around in general. How have you been?
I've been good. I've been safe and healthy, which I think is the most important. Those are the two most important characteristics I think nowadays that people can be in light of all things. The COVID-19 issue that is still plaguing, and that's the only way the only phrase that I can think of that is plaguing the country. And we want to get back to normal as fast as possible. And I think trying to listen to medical and healthcare officials about best practices will ensure us getting back to that more traditional way of life that we all know and love.
Absolutely. And if we can keep keep this thing from spreading, we might actually have some football in the fall. If you think about it that way, is it inconvenient to wear a mask? Yes. Is it uncomfortable? Yes. Will it help prevent the spread? Yes. So therefore, you will get football back a little more. You'll be a little more likely to have football in the fall if we all do our part. So think about it that way. Don't do it for us. Don't do it for a politician. Don't do it whether you believe it or not. Whatever your beliefs are in this thing or whoever experts you're listening to, do it for football.
There you go. And what could be better than that? Doing it for football.
Yeah. So, Chip, how would you, for our new listeners who might have come on board here with the Buckeye Scoop, how would you describe our particular show?
Well, I'm gonna say that we already touched on we already have the recruiting covered for you with some of the other star-studded individuals at Buckeye Scoop. I would say that we're kind of more of the guys that you watch the game with, and we're not nearly as obnoxious as like some of the drunks that you might encounter at your local town bar. That we kind of pride ourselves on being able to look at things as objectively and critically as you possibly can for an Ohio State oriented podcast.
Right. You and I have been writing about sports for quite some time. I have been a sports writer, professional journalist, covered football at the high school, college, and professional level, and I'm a former Lantern sports editor and writer there, so familiarity with covering the Buckeyes, and you've covered it for Athlon Sports for a while. Where else have people maybe read your stuff?
Yeah, thank you. With Athlon Sports, I mean, you just kind of touched on it. I recently wrote an article for Athlon Sports ranking Ohio State's schedule, and as you so accurately stated, we all want to see those games played. So, everyone doing their part to ensure that we have college football in the fall. That's something, that article is available online presently. And previously I'd written for the Ozone, some other Ohio State oriented sites, among them, Men of the Scarlet and Gray, as well as Land Grant, Holy Land previously. So like you, very familiar with Ohio State football and college football overall.
I've been writing, I wrote with you at theozone.net for a while, was the grumpy old Buckeye over there. Before that, I was with the 11 Warriors for a couple of years, and then before that, was with OurHonorDefend.com. So been covering the Buckeyes for quite a while. So I guess, you explained that we're the guys you might watch the game with, but we've also written about the game for quite some time. So we might know a couple of things about it, and we like to do, rather than what like Tom Moore and Tony Gerdeman do with the Buckeye Weekly. We're more of an in-season show. It's unusual for us to do off-season shows like this one. We typically will do, a season preview. We'll do, we'll do individual game previews. We'll break things down for offense, defense. We'll come back after the fact, and we'll talk about the game and break that down in detail, and sort of make our predictions and that kind of thing. So that's kind of what you can expect from the Silver Bullets podcast as we move forward.
Yeah, and we also do like to look at, besides Ohio State during the season, as you so accurately stated, what's going on around the Big Ten. Kind of getting a feel for, kind of what's that old saying from, like from The Godfather. It's like keep your friends close, but your enemies closer, kind of a thing. It's like knowing kind of what's going on around the Big Ten, in terms of how future Ohio State opponents, how they're looking, what Ohio State may even have to deal with or anticipate when Ohio State eventually plays them during the season.
Mm-hmm. And we also leave the gun and take the cannolis.
Precisely.
So you and I discussed a little bit about what we should talk about, and obviously we wanted to introduce ourselves to the Buckeye Scoop faithful. We're really excited to be here. Like you said, I'm planning to do some writing for Buckeye Scoop this fall, but those conversations really haven't gotten too far advanced because everybody's been so busy getting the site up and running and getting everything working and getting the podcasts moved over that we're moving over for some of the from the Ozone and getting some of the new podcasts going and just setting up some unbelievable guests as well. So
yes,
the bar has been set very high for us to keep pace with everybody else, and I think we're going to have to work really hard this year to do that. But I'm looking forward to this challenge, and one of the things that we wanted to discuss was this recent news about the Alabama series, and I know that when I heard about this, I wasn't home, and I looked down and just briefly saw something about Alabama and Ohio State on my phone, and I didn't really have time to look at it. I went back later and went, wow, that's really cool. I mean, where were you when you found out, and what was your initial thought when you saw, Alabama and Ohio State not only playing, here in the future, but playing a home and home on the campuses in these very storied stadiums?
Well, I can say that I was at home. I've been I've been working from home during this whole period of COVID-19. Like my secret identity day job, so to speak, has me working from home. And I was fortunate enough to be seated when I happened to, just kind of an occasional break during the workday, see on Twitter that it was announced. So, instead of falling down, I was already seated, just because, again, this is one of those series that personally, I've always wanted Ohio State to have an opportunity to play against Alabama. Now that it's going to eventually come to pass, I know we've got a few years to kind of, build up the anticipation. I just think it's tremendous, not only for Ohio State, but also for college football in general. The fact that it's going to be a home and home, it's not going to be a neutral site series. It's going to be, we're going to have the opportunity to host the Crimson Tide. The following year, Alabama is going to be hosting Ohio State in Tuscaloosa. It's going to be something else.
Yeah, the initial matchup will be September 18th, 2027. I think that'll be a nice birthday gift to myself to come up for that game. I do live in Central Florida now. Obviously, I'm a Buckeye. I lived there and went to school at Ohio State, and now I am relocated, and my job is here, my family's here, and that'd be a good excuse to go back and visit the shoe in 2027. Seems like a long way away. And then in 2028, the return game in Tuscaloosa at Alabama on September 9th, 2028. Chip, are you going to these two games?
I can say with almost complete certainty that I will be certainly at the one in Columbus. I can't say that I'm going to be able to get into Ohio Stadium, but I'll be in Columbus. I can't imagine any reason why I would not want to be there, just even for the tailgating atmosphere. Now, I've been partial to Dreamland Barbecue, so I can't say that I will not make the trip down to Tuscaloosa, but Mrs. Minnich might have a little bit more to say about that, in terms of whether we make the trip down the following year down to Tuscaloosa. But I'll certainly do all my best to get the honeydew list accomplished, if that will ensure a trip down to Alabama to see that one.
Chip, a lot of couples like to take a second honeymoon at some point. And,
there you go.
Can you think of a more romantic place than Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to take the missus?
I was good. Something. I'll have to start planting those seeds of wisdom right now.
It's interesting because we've seen Ohio State doing this for some time now. Getting big name opponents. We've got Oregon next on the itinerary, and then Notre Dame coming up in the next couple of years. Then Washington, Texas, Boston College. In fact, Boston College is going to overlap with Alabama in 2027. There'll be an Alabama game and then at Boston College in the non-conference schedule. And it looks like Alabama's been doing this as well, is to start bulking up their future schedules. And Tom and Tony on Buckeye Weekly were talking a little bit about this. This looks like what teams might be doing in expectation that there may be an 8-team playoff expansion by then.
It certainly makes sense. The idea that if you, for example, if you are in Ohio State or in Alabama and you have a tougher schedule, non-conference schedule, I should say, and if you happen to suffer, I'm not saying a horrible loss, but maybe a close loss, to a good team, and then even if you don't necessarily go through your conference unscathed, the fact that will look better overall in the eyes of the committee to get you one of those coveted playoffs seeds, I think that certainly seems plausible to me.
Yeah, and there's not as much to lose by scheduling a big game in the non-conference schedule, because you can lose that game and still recover from that and make the expanded playoff. So I think there's been ample evidence that much of the SEC doesn't like to schedule difficult games outside of conference, and maybe now with this expectation that maybe there'll be an expansion of the playoff, maybe we'll start to see better matchups in the non-conference schedule.
And if there's a minor regret, and I want to emphasize minor, it's that considering we're talking non-conference, one of the things that I personally would love to see is an SEC team come up during the winter, or I shouldn't say the winter, but the fall period when it might be a little colder. Now, I realize that's going to be kind of a tough ask, not only of any SEC team, but also, for Ohio State, because you're smack dab in the middle of your conference schedule there. So, it's just one of those things where I think that would be always interesting to see how would an Alabama or any other SEC team that is so used to playing when the weather is not a factor, seeing how they would adjust to that. But again, all things considered, just the mere fact that Ohio State and Alabama have this schedule signed and on the docket for a few years down the road, I think it's going to be well worth the wait.
Absolutely. And then there's there's waiting in the wings after Alabama all the way out in 2030, home and home with Georgia. So a lot of really marquee games as we sunset into older age, Chip.
I know. Yeah, hopefully, like I said, we have to remember we want to be there. So we gotta continue to have kind of a somewhat healthy lifestyle so we can enjoy these games when they do come to pass.
Yes, absolutely. Chip, one of the things that has been going on this week is that the Big Ten Network is selecting its all-decade team from the Big Ten, and they rolled it out with linebackers and running backs yesterday as we record this, and then the offensive line today. And so, it's some of the names weren't too overly surprising. But there are some, I think, omissions. Now, the linebackers, they went with Chris Borland of Wisconsin. Kind of hard to argue that. Devin Bush of Michigan. Okay. Josie Jewell of Iowa. So those are the linebackers that were selected. Chip, in your opinion, who is the biggest linebacker snub, and why is it Ryan Shazier?
Well, since you stole my answer. It does make you wonder. I mean, I would say that Ryan Shazier, for his impact, and I realized when we were talking the decade team that was at the beginning of the decade, but even so, his contributions as an Ohio State linebacker, I know, he certainly should have been in that threesome. It is kind of surprising, to say the least.
Now, the running backs that were selected were Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley. And on the face of that, you think, okay, those seem like pretty good picks. And then you do a little bit of digging. And then you look at Saquon Barkley and what he accomplished at Penn State. And you look at somebody, I don't know, say Ezekiel Elliott, for example, from Ohio State, and you compare the numbers, and you see that, interestingly enough, they had the same number of touchdowns. Zeke had more yards per carry and more yardage in fewer carries than Saquon Barkley. Zeke had more national championships, and yet Zeke is on the second team and not the first team. What happened there?
Yeah, I consider this even a bigger omission than the Ryan Shazier situation we just discussed. Ohio State doesn't win the national championship in 2014 without the performance of Ezekiel Elliott. As you said, he pretty much put Ohio State on his back, and I guess you could say, through the strength and speed of his legs, with a performance that Ohio State fans can clearly recall in the Big Ten championship against Wisconsin, against Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, and then, against Oregon for the national championship. So I consider that even more of a glaring omission, all things considered, at that position.
Yeah, when you look at the last 4 games of his season that year, against Michigan and in the Big Ten championship game and in the 2 college football playoff games on the way to the championship, just an unbelievably tremendous rise in production from Zeke. He really stepped up, especially considering the fact that, obviously J.T. Barrett got hurt, and the team was going to have to go with a backup quarterback, a third-string quarterback in Cardale Jones. Now everybody knows the story. Cardale came out and played like gangbusters and did a great job, and won the national championship anyway. But Ezekiel Elliott really stepped up when he needed to that year, and he had a great career. As we mentioned the stats already, they match favorably with Saquon Barkley. Jonathan Taylor may have had a little bit easier road, I think, in some respects, considering his division was the easier division. And they gave him the rock a lot. Ezekiel Elliott was out of the game in the third quarter most of his career. So I do think it's an omission. I think it's a pretty egregious omission. I've watched Ohio State bloggers and writers argue with Penn State fans about this on Twitter, and honestly, the Penn State fans don't really have too much of a leg to stand on. What they usually end up coming down with at the end out of desperation as well. Ezekiel Elliott had a better offensive line. If Saquon Barkley had that line, he would have put up better numbers. So they're playing the what if card.
Sure.
But it's what they have. So,
as you said, Ohio State did have a tremendous offensive line, and the All Big Ten decade team is representative of that.
This is true. This came out today, and here's where it kind of gets weird, because the Big Ten Network decided that just the regular 5-man line wasn't enough. They needed to go with 6. They needed 6 offensive linemen. So if you're going to go with 6 offensive linemen, why not go with 4 linebackers and 3 running backs?
Or like Gerd and Tom on their podcast recently, when they were doing their they had the 7 linebackers, I think, that they eventually came up with for like the all-time greatest Ohio State defensive team. So
yeah, I
creativity.
Did enjoy that. Yeah, their goats, their Ohio State defensive goats show was interesting, because they were talking about they're the best linebackers of all time at Ohio State, and they're just throwing all these fantastic names out there one after another, and Gradishar and Spielman and Marcus Merrick and all these guys, and not once did the name Pepper Johnson come up. And I thought, well, how good is the linebacker history at Ohio State when the Pepper Johnson doesn't even enter that equation?
Well, Pepper Johnson not being listed, and then I know the defensive backs have not been listed by the Big Ten Network yet, but Gerd and Tom, among their defensive backs, and I realize he was, a two-way player, but they didn't mention Chris Gamble either.
Yeah,
what I mean? There's so many great players and that's not taking shots at either of them. There are so many great players.
No.
It's difficult.
It's you just you're overwhelmed when you're trying to pick out individuals in that kind of company. It will be interesting, because they were both very high on recent Ohio State defensive backs, so it'll be interesting to see what the Big Ten Network's panel comes up with. The offensive line, you mentioned, I was starting to get to the point where I was like, well, maybe Ohio State just wasn't very good in the last decade. Maybe they just weren't a very good football team to not have anybody on the when the linebackers and running backs came out, no Ohio State players were on the first team. But 2 made it on the offensive line, and one was a bit of a surprise to me, and that is 1-year starter Wyatt Davis made all-decade team guard for Ohio State, and this is pretty impressive because he's still playing. Yeah,
I mean, precisely the fact that he's still playing. We're anticipating the upcoming season being Wyatt Davis's last year in Columbus. I'm not saying it has to be, but we're anticipating it, and it's just one of these things where, for him to be the only current player as of this recording, to be awarded that all-decade honor is tremendous.
The other Buckeye honored was Billy Price at center. He was kind of a no-brainer, even though he was only center for 1 year. He did win the Remington Trophy as the nation's outstanding center after playing elsewhere on the offensive line for a couple of years. Billy Price played in 55 games as a Buckeye and won 49 of them.
That's quite impressive. And again, his versatility, as you said, the fact that he only played center for the 1 year, but at guard, his contributions on the offensive line were immense, despite obviously not having an all Big Ten decade caliber running back to block for in the eyes of the Big Ten network.
Yep. They also honored tackle Brandon Scherff from Iowa. He was a big name. He won the Outland Trophy. Obviously, he's a guy you would see that name on there and not flinch or question that. The other tackle position went to Taylor. All I've known at Michigan is failure Lewan, a two-time All-American who gave up a lot of sacks and quarterback pressures against Ohio State, but he is your other tackle. Not Taylor Decker, not any other Ohio State players. And then they went with, because there were two Buckeyes, they decided they needed two additional guards with Wyatt Davis. And they went with Dan Feeney of Indiana and also Michael Dieter from Wisconsin. So you've got a six-man offensive line there, Chip. I'm not sure what you're going to run. You've got two running backs in. I'm assuming they're going to have a tight end. I don't know. I think they're going to have too many people on the field.
Yeah, I'm kind of questioning what their rationale was in, like you said, the six-man offensive line. In terms of having too many people, I can understand, saying it was very close or something like that, but like to rattle off six, it is kind of confusing.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're going to do that, why not just honor a fourth linebacker or a third running back? It's like, who's counting at this point, right?
Sure, right, precisely.
So anyway, Ohio State, good offensive line, and so far nothing else all that great in the eyes of this this committee. Now, some Ohio State players were mentioned as second teamers. I'm on the Big Ten Network site. I don't see a second team listed on here, but here's who your voters are, Chip. There are 24 members on this panel, and you would think, given the makeup of this panel, there would be more Buckeyes represented, but we'll see. So Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic, author John U. Bacon, Lisa Byington of BTN, Charles Davis, CBS Sports, BTN's Jerry DiNardo, Fox Sports' Bruce Feldman, Sports Illustrated's Pat Forty somehow bribed his way to get in on this. Teddy Greenstein of the Chicago Tribune, Howard Griffith, BTN, Mike Hall, BTN, former Buckeye quarterback Stanley Jackson from BTN, Joel Klatt from Fox Sports, James Laurinaitis, former Buckeye, BTN, Jay Lehman, Chuck Long, Glenn Mason, all with BTN, Urban Meyer, Matt Millen of BTN. So, that's a problem too.
Yeah.
Not known for his great personnel selection. Josh Perry, so Joshua Perry, Rick Pizzo, Dave Revson, Alex Rue, Harold Shelton, and Brent Urena. So those are the people that are picking. So direct all your venom to them. Not really. Social media is tough enough out there without piling on. But seriously, no Zeke Elliott.
Like I said, that's the most puzzling one when you think back to that championship run at the end of the season. It wouldn't have happened without the performance of Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah. Who do you think gets quarterback of the decade?
Well, I know who it should be, but I don't want to jinx it. If anything, again, it's like I look at it, it's like in terms of, when you go by the records and things like that, I'll be surprised if somebody with Ohio State, is not at the helm. Then again, the Big Ten Network seems to have some kind of questionable reasoning and rationale for some of their personnel decisions.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I sometimes think about this when I'm flipping through and I'm like, what's on TV tonight? And I flip on the Big Ten Network and I'm like, it's Indiana Day, or it's Northwestern Day, or it's Rutgers Day of all things. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? They do have other constituencies they really need to keep happy. It's not just about Ohio State fans. We might move the needle, but they do have to. They have to walk that line, and they can't be seen as favoring one team. Even if that team's been dominant, they can't really be seen as playing favorites. So I think that kind of works against Ohio State in things like this.
Right. I mean, it's the kind of thing where I'm sure if you're a fan of those other schools, and after a while, just how dominant Ohio State has been on the football field. After a while, okay, can we please not watch, any more Ohio State football classics, right. And then, when you see some of these games, I mean, seriously, it's like, okay, they're pulling out games, from, not that I'll take football in any way, shape, or form I can get it. But, some of these games from over 30 years ago, I mean, just completely, all right, that's the best you can do for this, for this team is find a game from 30 years ago. So it's certainly a challenge for the Big Ten Network to try and keep 14 schools happy.
Well, it is nice to hear Keith Jackson's voice again.
There you go.
But if you watch these others too, you see some of these Michigan State football classics. They're always the times they beat Ohio State. That's what they always put those in there. So, and I don't watch those because I don't want to see that again. I lived through it once,
Right.
But at least they get their little moment of some. But yeah, I mean, it would be, you put yourself in their shoes, and it would be annoying to just continuously watch. Oh, here's Ohio State beating Michigan in 2016. Here's Ohio State beating Michigan in 2017. Here's Ohio State beating Michigan in 2018, and so on.
Right.
But really, Michigan fans should be the most tired of it. I'm
sure they are.
And long may they be tired of it, is what I have to say. All right, let's move on to this topic that you had suggested about college football potentially moving to the spring. And this is an interesting idea because there's a lot at play here. There's the fact that right now we really don't know if COVID-19 is going to push the season. I think it wouldn't be surprising to anybody if the season got, delayed. Certainly we don't know when fans are going to be able to go to games safely and how many and what percentage of the stadium can be filled and how they keep people socially distanced in the process of coming into the stadium and leaving the stadium and going to the concession stand and going to the restrooms. You can have a 100,000 seat stadium and let 20,000 people in, and once they're in their seats, they're fine. But it's all the other stuff that goes with it that is, puts people at risk.
I think you hit a lot of that right on the head. I mean, that's the mystery of this whole situation is how is this all going to be managed? And if you had asked me, I'm not ashamed to admit it. If you had asked me about 2-3 weeks ago, would we have college football in the fall? I would have said absolutely. I mean, everything is pointing in the right direction. And unfortunately, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast, is that things have not been going in the right direction recently, which is kind of what sparked the concern. You're seeing more and more people online speculating, will college football be possibly pushed out until the spring? Personally, I hope it isn't. But if that means the likelihood of players, of a full season versus an abbreviated season. Most importantly, of players being safe and healthy. I certainly can understand the logic and the rationale for possibly making such a move.
Yeah, and it is interesting if they do have to push things and push it into the spring. For me, it really depends. Can they play college football in the spring? Of course they could, but I think what it really comes down to is, would they, if the NFL didn't push into the spring? And I don't think they would, Chip. I think that if the NFL just went ahead and played, in the fall like they always do, or canceled their season, I don't see college football played in the spring. Now, if the NFL moved to the spring and pushed their draft back till, midsummer or whatever, then you might see college football follow suit and play in the spring, and then they would be able to have their, they'd probably figure out some safe way to do their pro day, and they'd be able to have their draft. We've already had a draft, during the pandemic, so we know it can be done. Hopefully they'll get somebody to host it next year instead of Roger Goodell. But other than that, I think it could be done, but I don't see it happening unless the NFL does it, because I think there are just too many question marks otherwise. And I think you'll see players who are, entering this year like it's their last year may just decide, well, I'm not going to play in the spring and then risk getting injured right before the draft. I'm going to take this time off. And I think that would be problematic.
I completely agree with you. I think that there's a lot more to this that needs to be, I guess you could say, contemplated, rather than just kind of, the possibility of a vaccine is greater in the spring is kind of, like a lot of, again, depending on who you listen to, or, who you choose to listen to, I should say, the possibility of the coronavirus, in terms of, being neutralized, if you will, as best as possible, further into the spring. I certainly understand that, but I think it comes down to the concerns that a lot of college football coaches, probably administrators, have is around the country. You read about different schools having, X number of players test positive for coronavirus, and being concerned about, well, what happens when or if, like, the week of a game, and we have X number of people who test positively, will we still be able to have the game? So I don't want to say that it's going to happen, that it's going to be moved to the spring. It's just one of those things where, when we were talking about possible topics for the podcast, this is just something that, is kind of, I don't want to say gaining momentum, but it's been voiced and written about by other people besides you and I, about the possibility and the concern of having to do it.
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is look around and see what's going on. I mean, you've got NBA players testing positive, and they're trying to get their season finished that, started in 2019 in the fall. You've got players that are going to be in the basketball tournament, former Ohio State players like Jayshawn Tate, Keyshawn Woods, testing positive, and them having to pull out of that event. And, you touched on Clemson. Clemson has had 37 positive tests just on their football team alone, which goes to show you that Dabo Swinney is more dangerous to Tigers than Joe Exotic. Chip, have I lost you?
No, you did not lose me. No, I'm sorry. I was just shaking my head at that. No, so I think it's a concern, because we joke about getting older, and wanting to see these games and be in attendance, when Ohio State plays Alabama. One of the concerns, and this is not meant to sound kind of like get off my lawn type guy, is that, okay, these players around the country. I mean, let's face it, it's one of these things that they go to bars, they go to parties, and the fact that, like that they're not social distancing is contributing to these positive tests. So it's just one of these things where just trying to get people to understand, because I saw it before we started recording the podcast, like more and more college coaches saying, hey, if you want to see college football this fall, wear a mask. That's kind of, it's just almost like a public service announcement. And you can only hope that the players will exercise best judgment when it comes to anything social, because I understand, wanting to, go to a bar or, go to a party, and be with teammates and have a good time when you're not conditioning for football. But it's going to take a lot of self-discipline by everybody in order to have college football in the fall.
Absolutely. We talked about Ezekiel Elliott earlier. Ezekiel Elliott tested positive, and he had gone to a party at, I believe, at Dak Prescott's house. So
I think you might be right.
That's, again, this is not great judgment in this current time. I mean, we all want to go out and see our friends. It's been a long time. We all want to spend time with them. We want to, give people hugs and high fives and handshakes and all of that stuff. And we want to have a couple beers with some friends. And you can't do that with a mask on because, you can't drink through the mask. So it's difficult. One of the things, I live in Central Florida. The only team that has not restarted from the National Women's Soccer League is the Orlando Pride, because some of the players on the team went out to bars and they tested positive, and they didn't have enough players, and they had players that needed to quarantine, and they had players' roommates that needed to quarantine, and some staff members, and they just weren't in position. This was just a few days before they were supposed to fly out to Utah to take part in that tournament. They had to pull out of the tournament, so there's only 8 of the league's 9 teams are in the tournament, and Orlando is sitting out because of this. So it is a very quick cascade. If players on a team get it and they hang out with their teammates, then you have what you got going on at Clemson, and 37 people have it, and then you've got to you got to wait out the period. You've got to isolate for 2 weeks. You've got to have your 2 negative tests to prove that you can come back. And meanwhile, you've got to hope that these kids don't get sick.
Right. Yeah, it's scary because, as you said, you're down in Florida. I'm in Ohio. And again, I don't want to, if people want to, have their thoughts and their opinions on the right way to do things, the wrong way to do things. In Ohio, I will tell you that in recent days, there's been an increase or an uptick in people testing positively. And my suspicion back in the spring was when Ohio, since we don't really have a spring, it's like, it's just, we just really don't. I mean, it just gets less cold, and then all of a sudden, like, you get nice weather like we currently have. My suspicion was, even then, is that the social distancing, as difficult as it was and is, was a little easier to take when the weather was, when it's cold outside and you can't be outside. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, okay, you still want to go, obviously you still want to go to restaurants and bars, but it's like, it's a little easier to take when you can't go, to your favorite bar where they have an outdoor patio. Well, now you're in the summertime and you do have nice weather, and people want to go to the outdoor patio bar, and guess what? They're not wearing masks and they're in close proximity. So again, all we're saying is, if you want college football, wear a mask, be responsible, try to be, as safety conscious as possible. And the sooner we kind of adopt that kind of mentality, the better we will all be, and the closer we will be to having college football.
Absolutely. And as somebody who lives in Florida, all I can say is, Ohio, you're doing a pretty good job. It's It's states like the one I live in that are not doing a really good job right now. And yeah, a lot of states are up across the board, but Florida is really exploded. It's set like 5 new single-day records in the last 10 days, and it's been pretty remarkable how quickly those numbers have gone up from, a high of mid 2000s to almost 10,000 cases. It's been kind of scary to watch it on the rise, and now they're throwing some restrictions in place, and bars can't serve on-premise alcohol and things like that. So they're rolling some stuff back, but not probably not nearly enough, because there's it's almost to the point where they probably need a stay-at-home order again. But the governor has decided that's not gonna fly. So here we are. It's like when your kid wants candy and they really just don't want those vegetables, so you just say, okay, we'll have some more candy, kids. That's basically our governor at this point. So he's like, well, I don't think that they're going to like it, so I'm not going to make them do it. That's what we got going on here. So good old Florida. So the last item that you had brought up, and this is again, this has been all over the news, of course, the Black Lives Matter protests and the movement, in the wake of, basically a murder on videotape in Minnesota, and what's been going on and how that's trickled into college sports. We've already seen it affect, the University of Iowa with, a strength coach losing his job, and honestly, if you read some accounts from some former players, Kirk Ferentz, if any of that's corroborated, Kirk Ferentz probably will be gone. I haven't been really looking at too much in the world of college football in terms of that. You see the players tweeting about it and posting on social media about it. And certainly there's a lot going on with Mississippi, because there's the controversy with their state flag, needing to be changed and all of that. How has Ryan Day been handling this? From what I've seen, he has been supportive. Obviously, they made that video, but what are you're more centered in Ohio. You may have more input on this than me. What are you seeing coming out of Ohio State on this topic?
I think Ohio State's been doing a tremendous job with this. It's the kind of thing where when you talk about Ryan Day, he was one of the first coaches, I'm not saying the first, but one of the first coaches to make a video. The football team had a tremendous video speaking out against racism, about in support of Black Lives Matter. Different sport, but one of the I don't want to say it was like something that gained national notoriety. Maybe I'm mistaken. Seth Towns, who transferred from Harvard to Ohio State, was arrested, in his stance and speaking out against racism. I mean, it's those kind of things where Ohio State has a lot to be proud of for the way that they've conducted themselves during this important time. I think this opportunity as a white male who has, I'll just say it, has grown up in suburbia. I look at this as an opportunity for continually learning, for continual growth for myself. And I think Ohio State has been tremendously supportive of their athletic community in trying to broaden the perspectives of each other as well as the fans who support them. And you mentioned, for example, Iowa parting ways with Chris Doyle, their longtime strength and conditioning coach. I mean, so many programs across the country, that you can see, a lot of the players refusing to participate until changes are made. I mean, Iowa is probably the most notable in the sense that they're a Big Ten rival of Ohio State's, but so many college programs are truly having to confront the way that they have conducted themselves or have allowed their leadership to conduct themselves. And I think Ohio State has a lot to be proud of for the way that they've been doing things. Ryan Day has certainly, I think, not only his support probably certainly behind the scenes, but definitely in front of the camera, as I said a few moments ago, I think is to be commended.
It's good to see. I mean, I'm kind of taking the same approach you have. It's like I'm doing a lot more listening, a lot more reading, a lot more learning, and trying to catch up because I was raised in a very rural area of Ohio, extremely white area. It's not an exaggeration to say there were 2 black kids in the entire school district when I was there, and they were brother and sister. They happened to live in my neighborhood, and Jeff was a couple years younger than me. He was my sister's age. We hung out a lot because most of the kids in my neighborhood were my sister's age, my oldest of my 2 sisters. And I can tell you that my high school did not ever utter the word Juneteenth when I was there. We didn't learn about the Tulsa massacre was not a part of our curriculum. There were a lot of gaps in my education, and I have to fill those gaps. That's my responsibility.
I have even though I wasn't in a rural community, I kind of comparable in the sense that like I'm from white bread suburbia, on the west side of Cleveland, and the same community that I grew up in is the same community that my wife and I are raising our children. I am pleased to report that our community has grown somewhat in terms of that there are more students, like you said, I think you said 2, it was kind of eerie listening to you say that, because it was, that was the same number where I grew up. And again, that was in suburbia. Like you, Juneteenth was never discussed. Like you, the Tulsa massacre was never taught. So this is an opportunity for everybody. I mean, I'm 50 years old, and I always say you're never too old to learn. I look at this as definitely, like you said, I think very well, an opportunity to grow, to listen more and educate and, consider and contemplate alternative perspectives that perhaps you never even realized were out there, experiences that you never knew about. So this is, we're talking about it with respect to Ohio State. I think Ohio State has a lot to be commended for the way that they've conducted themselves during this difficult time.
Yeah, and it's easy to it's easy to pay lip service to something. It's harder to. It's easy to talk the talk. It's harder to walk the walk, and it seems like they're walking the walk there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, it will be interesting to see if any further. I mean, I'm sure things will come out about. I mean, college football teams are very, closed networks, but there's, those networks are not, closed forever. They, players move on, and they're no longer under the influence of their coaches, and they will speak their minds, and they will talk about things that bothered them when they were there. And we had this, I referenced this earlier, the statement from Akrum Wadley about his time at Iowa and the stuff that's gone on in Iowa. And of course, they sacrificed their strength coach. But if the stuff that's in Akrum Wadley's report, about his time there, it gets corroborated, then I don't think that Brian Ferentz or Kirk Ferentz will be welcome, in that stadium, maybe ever again.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something where the athletes are recognizing their collective power in being able to bring about, let's just say, necessary change. I'm not just saying change. It's right. Necessary change.
Yes. And
so it's to be applauded and commended, and it is dreadfully unfortunate that Akrum Wadley or anyone else, regardless of whether we're talking at Iowa or any other college football program, has had any of those kind of experiences. But this is, as I said, this is an opportunity for growth, to learn, to make things better, to try to get to form that more perfect union that we talk about, like to try to get to that better place. And I think it truly inspires me to see younger people being so actively involved in bringing about this necessary change.
Yeah, there is something satisfying about watching these young athletes realize how much power they have, and not being afraid to use that, not being afraid to upset the status quo, and not being afraid to stand up for what's right. I mean, you talked about Seth Towns and what he's been going through, and obviously it was great to see the university support him. Gene Smith and Chris Holtman and President Drake, who I believe is his last day on the job.
Yes.
This week.
Mm-hmm.
So,
that is correct.
Yeah, so it was great to see the university supporting him and letting him, seize this moment to use whatever power he has, whatever platform he has, to enact, as you mentioned, necessary change. And it's not a just world or a just country until the playing field is level for everyone. And that doesn't mean that you and I are going to lose anything. That means that everybody is going to be able to have what we have had, and enjoyed our whole lives, and that's a good thing.
Yes, precisely.
All right, Chip, before we get out of here, we do have a listener question, and you can reach out to us on Twitter if you have questions you want to ask for the next edition of the Silver Bullets podcast. And Chip and I have to have the discussion of when our next one will be, because in these uncertain times, it's not just, we'll reconvene 2 weeks before the season starts, because we don't know if the season is going to start on time. So
exactly.
We will continue to follow the stories coming out of Ohio State, and the topics that we are, that have been discussed on Buckeye Scoop and on social media and in the news, and we'll continue to follow that, and we'll talk about that stuff when we reconvene. But you can reach Chip or myself on Twitter. I am at Mike36Fan on Twitter, and Chip is just at Chip Minnich. That's his name. How do you spell that, Chip?
Yeah, it's spelled Minnich. Yeah, I'm not as creative as Michael in terms of my Twitter handle, but yeah. That's as plain and straightforward as you could possibly get.
Yeah, I may have to change that to something more Scoop friendly.
Okay. Right.
Maybe it's easier to remember. But yeah, you can hit us up on Twitter and ask us anything you want, even if it's not football or Ohio State related. We'll happily field your question. But we do have a question, Chip, and it comes to us from Neil on Twitter. Neil wants to know. He says, Ohio State prides itself on offering Ohio-raised players. Who's the next great player to come out of the state and play for the Bucks?
Okay, now I'm just saying the reason I'm stammering before I say this is because for those people who may not be entirely familiar, this is the kind of thing where we don't collaborate on these kind of things, and Michael is generous enough the majority of the time to let me go first, and then I'm usually hearing kind of like some muttering because I possibly steal his answer without knowing it. Okay,
I will answer first if you want.
I'm just gonna say I'm prepared. I've got a few in mind. So
okay.
If I happen to take your player, you can immediately stop me and I can go to others. But the question was, Ohio naturally priding itself on cultivating and developing great players from within the state and turning them into Buckeyes. Mm-hmm. I think the one player that I think fits this bill that I'm truly excited for, and again, I know this is putting a lot of pressure on this young man because he's a true freshman, but I'm looking forward to watching offensive tackle Parris Johnson. We're talking, in terms of some of the great offensive linemen that Ohio State has produced in the past. I think Parris Johnson is hopefully going to get ample opportunity to play this year as a true freshman. Arguably the greatest offensive lineman in the history of the game, Orlando Pace, has said that Parris Johnson plays with a mean streak. If you haven't had the opportunity to listen to the great interview that Kirk Barton had with Orlando Pace, they brought up Parris Johnson's name. So Parris Johnson is my selection.
All right, Chip, you took mine, but that's okay because I had two. It's okay. It's okay. We can have the same answer because there's no, you're giving your opinion here. And see, when Neil asked this, my first thought was, we're not recruiting guys, but we do sort of pay attention. We hear things. I do watch videotape when I can, especially if somebody has is coming in very highly regarded, like Parris Johnson. Parris Johnson was one that I thought of in terms of somebody who's already on the team but who has not played yet, because the key to me is who's the next great player to come out of the state and play for the Bucs, and he has not yet done that. So I think Parris Johnson is certainly one of two names that came to mind. And the other that came to mind, and again, I'm not a recruiting guy, but I've seen video. The other name that came out to me that kind of stood out was Jack Sawyer.
Yes, that was my second choice, by the way.
And
that's
Sawyer,
where, yeah.
See, Jack Sawyer is a defensive end out of Pickerington North, and I believe he's the third-rated defensive end in the country. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, you're talking about a player who was on Ohio State's recruiting radar. I mean, as a true freshman, like that dominant at that young of an age to be catching the eye of Ohio State's coaching staff is to be commended.
He's a 5-star guy. He's, I've seen some film on him. It's tremendous. He's already 6'5", 220, so he's already got good size, really good prototypical defensive end size. I mean, he looks the part, and he's third nationally, third in his position in the state, number one recruit, and I think he's going to have a great Buckeye career. So he's going to obviously be, God willing, that he stays on. He's going to be coached up by Larry Johnson. So he'll follow in those footsteps of the Bosas and Chase Young and Zach Harrison, who I think is going to take a big step forward this year and be that next guy. So I think those are the two guys that I thought of. Obviously, they're the two guys you thought of, Chip. So maybe we're either both right or we just share the same brain.
I'd like to think it's the former. So.
I'd like to believe that, but thank you, Neil, for your question.
Yes.
Appreciate that. And again, you can hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Mike36Fan, and you can get Chip at Chip Minnich, ChipMinnich, and ask us a question for next time. And we'll put out the call too. If you follow us on Twitter, we'll put out a call before the next time we record, and you can have a chance to get your questions in. We appreciate you doing that. Chip, unless there's something else you want to talk about, I think that will do it for our first ever show on the Buckeye Scoop radio network.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as we said at the beginning, truly excited to be a part of Buckeye Scoop, truly excited to be recording these podcasts with you. Hopefully we, get closer and closer to having an announcement of a season, like in some way, shape, or form. So it's kind of incumbent upon all of us to do what we can, to listen to the authorities, the medical authorities, the healthcare authorities, practice the social distancing, wear masks, do all those kind of things to increase the likelihood of a college football season. So, looking forward to having these podcasts and, getting back hopefully into the swing of things with college football.
Yeah, go and sign up for, to subscribe to all the Buckeye Scoop podcasts, Buckeye Weekly, Morning Scoop, Scoop World Order, obviously the Silver Bullets podcast. The Sloopcast came over with us.
Mm-hmm.
They beat us over here because they never stop doing shows.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I give credit to everybody everyone that I make a point of listening to, those podcasts. I give them all a ton of credit because, again, without a lot of current news, it's kind of difficult, so all credit to them.
Yeah, big thanks to Buckeye Scoop for having us. We would have probably tried to continue in some manner, some form, wherever, but, to be asked to come to a place like Buckeye Scoop and the great people that are involved here, some of whom we've already worked with for a while, so we know how great they are and how awesome it is to work with them. Very humbling and, very, very honored to be here. Thank you for listening. Again, get your questions in or hit us up on Twitter and ask us anything you want, even if you don't want us to read it on the air or answer on the air. If you just want to interact with us, obviously you can get us there. And look for us on the Buckeye Scoop. And like I said, subscribe to us so you can leave us a rating if you want. It doesn't cost you anything, and it helps us to get noticed by more people. So until next time, we're not really sure what that next time will be. We're more of usually an in-season podcast, but we will be happy to come back and visit with you again soonish. That it for you, Chip?
Yes, it is.
All right, so until next time, everybody, go Bucks!
Go Bucks!